this is an important topic that we probably don't talk about enough. And that is actually kind of your order of operations for fighting. Now, this is assuming that you are compelled to fight, you have justifiable reason to fight, whether that is you have signed up for a mutual engagement and you are bound, contractually, honor bound, whatever, to fight. You are protecting somebody or self-defense, or like it's part of your job as law enforcement or military, something like that, right? We are assuming a justifiable use of force. We are not just assuming you're being an ass. So we need to start off with the basic thing, right? Let's go with the OODA loop. This is a classic. This is something that everybody knows. Everybody talks about. This goes way back before I was ever born. Right? Observe, orient, decide, act. Observe. Basically, you are observing that there is a scenario that you must engage with. Orient. You orient to your position in that scenario, generally speaking, by physically moving in space to address the situation, whether that is escaping or engaging. Decide. Making your tactical decision on what you're going to be doing. Again, engaging or escaping and down to specific techniques and whatnot. And then act. Actually carrying out the thing. Where people really get hung up on is the decision making, right? But we're not going to get into that right now. Notice the thing that we're talking about first, right? Observe and orient. You have to be aware of the conflict and you have to orient yourself to engage or escape from that conflict. You cannot defend or attack things that you don't know exist, or things that you are just in no position to address. So that is going to be the most important part here. The decide and act is what all follows down here. Now, let's talk about the next part of this. And this is a really critical part that not enough people talk about, is context. Your context matters. If you are law enforcement or you are military, you have rules of engagement that a civilian in self-defense doesn't necessarily have, and vice versa. And so what is context, right? To put it simply, it's conditions and consequences. What are the conditions that you are fighting under? And that is literally everything from the environment to the physical and mental state of those involved, to the number of people involved, to the tools, the weapons, the tactics involved, all of that, right? It is the biggest, widest net for why you are engaging in the first place. And then consequences. What happens as a result of you deciding and acting, right? What are the consequences of your actions? Because that's going to be important in helping you decide things. And sometimes if you have a rigid set of consequences, you're going to have a much narrower set of decisions to make. And let's put it this way, right? Look at combat sports. Combat sports all have a rigid set of consequences. There are certain fouls, there are certain win conditions. And so it really narrows down what your decision making looks like, as opposed to something that is a lot more chaotic. So context absolutely matters. And then we have to look at tactics. Let's start with the easy thing, right? You have to survive, whether that means engaging and winning, or at least escaping. That's really important. But then let's kind of this is where our order of operations starts taking place, right? Our number one thing, especially as civilians, this is different if you are in a job role where you are obligated to engage. This actually includes in sports. If you are in combat sports, you have contractually agreed to engage on pain of loss of payment, loss of affiliation with the organization that's hosting the event, or just flat out forfeiting and losing, right? So understand that avoidance is really only for kind of the unexpected random violence that you would be talking about in the real world, right? You want to be avoiding conflict as best you can. That goes without saying. Next, we have de-escalation and escape, and these can kind of flip-flop because escape assumes that you've already engaged. De-escalation assumes that you've already engaged, or at least that you've made the decision to engage, right? De-escalation is really just simmering things down so that tensions are not as high and you have less chance of a critical conflict breaking out. Escape means that you kind of can't de-escalate and you have to get out of there, right? So it kind of goes along with the avoidance. It's just the next step in avoidance. It's stuff's already kind of kicked off, and you have to make sure that it does not go any further. If you cannot make the conflict go away peacefully, then you need to win. Because again, you have to survive. And you shouldn't lose. So that means that you have to find a way to win, right? So your two biggest win conditions are either making them quit or preventing continuation. Making them quit is fundamentally psychological. Making them quit is saying they no longer wish to continue because they perceive the cost too high to continue. This is not something that you should necessarily trust if you are engaged in a self-defense type of scenario or in a combative type of scenario, right? Because there's no moderator to enforce them quitting and calling off the engagement. That can totally be used as a foil. There are at least stories out there that I've heard, of people getting into a thing and they're used to somebody tapping out, like from a submission or whatever. So the assailant taps out. So the other guy breaks it off, let's go. And then the guy comes back with force, with a weapon, with friends, In fact, we had that one guy, and I'm forgetting his name, but it was down in Brazil. And, he got into a fight with an off-duty cop over the cop taking his beer off the table or something like that. And then, he subdues him, puts him down and everything, gets up, dusts him off. And then as he's going away, the cop pulls his gun and shoots him, right? So there's at least one scenario, right? So you do have to make sure that them quitting or you believing that you've subdued them has some sort of enforcement mechanism. And that enforcement mechanism honestly could be, again, escaping once you've made them quit, right? Because escaping can happen at any of these stages, unless, again, you are obligated to stay in. Preventing continuation is going to be more like knockouts. Making them lose consciousness is the number one way to make sure that you've won a fight, because if they are not conscious, they cannot continue to fight. That is kind of the definition of unconsciousness, right? And, well, it's not, but you know what I'm saying. The other side of it would be some kind of mechanical arrest or detainment, whether you're physically holding them down while you wait on backup, or you have physically restrained them with some kind of external implement, handcuffs, rope, whatever, or you have mechanically disabled them via bodily harm. And so preventing continuation is huge. And if you must win and you cannot trust them to quit when they say they quit, then you have to prevent continuation. Now, in this preventing continuation, we have its own kind of subcategory of orders, right? And that is going to be preventing them from continuing, standing and separated, meaning that you are not entangled, so that if they have friends or whatever, that you can deal with the next thing, or that if you need to leave, you can leave, or that if you have to disengage so that you can talk to cops or lawyers or whatever, you can do that, right? So standing separated, and essentially we're using here standing as a proxy for I am on my feet, I am under my own power, I am not entangled with them or connected to them in any way, shape, or form, so that I can move about freely, right? You have free movement and you are separated from them being prevented from continuation. That is kind of the ideal, but it's not always possible, right? And so then we go to, say, let's say a standing grapple. This is particularly useful, say, like for a bouncer or something, getting somebody into a bar hold, not having anything to do with the bar itself. It's how you bar your arm through the key, the lock. But a standing grapple is usually going to be an escort hold, or again, forcing them up against a wall or a table or a car or something to put them in restraints. And again, a standing grapple is particularly useful. Ideally, with a standing grapple, you're going to have to put them down eventually. So there's not like there is another stage to a standing grapple, unless of course you're doing a standing stranglehold, which is going to knock them unconscious. But if you're cuffing them, like obviously they could just still run away unless you leg shackle them or put them in a car or lock them in a room or something like that. So we do have to be a little bit careful there. But we're putting that in there in the sense of a standing restraint as opposed to standing and then being incapacitated separate. Then we can look at dominant ground positions. Now, this can go from the standing grapple. The standing grapple can move into a takedown, to which ideally you move into a dominant ground position. And that dominant ground position can be to move into some kind of physical disablement, some kind of a resting hold, again, knocking them unconscious through strikes or chokes. So dominant ground position is ideal if you hit the ground. And then, of course, if you don't end up on the in a dominant position, your first goal, if you're not in a dominant position, is to reverse out of that bottom position and get to a dominant position, right? And this is where I want to break off from this really quick, right? Be standing, get up if you fall. If you have to stay down, be on top. If you're not on top, get off of the bottom and get to the top. If you can't, then you win from the bottom. And that brings us to the final one here, is win from the bottom, which again is generally going to be some kind of physical disablement, whether that is loss of consciousness or mechanically disabling their body either through restraints or damage. But this is a general order of operations that you want to be looking for. Now, look, I didn't talk about weapons in here at all. A lot of this would be the same, but of course, one of the big things with weapons is cover and concealment. They're not the same thing, so there's that. Cover actually prevents the weapon from penetrating through and getting to you, whereas concealment just covers the line of sight. So cover and concealment is very, very important in weapons, especially firearms combat. But beyond that, again, once you engage, you're going to be kind of looking for all this. And again, with firearms, you'd be looking at standing separated is ideal, and then you can go down the list. Distance is your friend with weapons, right? I mean, distance is your friend in general, but sometimes you can't, right? And this is why every system has resorted to grappling as a backup to the hands of the weapons. So, let's just keep this in mind, right? Your order of operations is extraordinarily important and should inform the way that you train. Look, there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of break this down into minutia, and the way you could break this down into training plans. You can get really nerdy and weedy into the details, but having a general idea of what your order of operations for, especially if you were looking at a broad context martial arts plan as opposed to just a specific, I'm doing this sport, right? If you were doing just sport BJJ or just modern conventional boxing or just, kickboxing or just MMA, then your order of operations is going to be a lot more narrow and a lot more simple. And you're going to have a lot of overlap and whatnot that can do things differently. But generally speaking, right, having complete freedom of movement, being standing and separated, is where you are going to be peak ability. And then, reducing your mobility from standing to being on the ground, you want to be in more dominant positions rather than less dominant positions. This kind of just is obvious and goes without saying, right? Except we have to say it because so many people get so stuck on, I'm just going to pull guard and do the thing. And look, there are a lot of really fantastic guard players. There's a lot of really, really fantastic guard players. How does that change when the context changes? That's the question that we have to ask. So look, it really does depend on context, your conditions and your consequences. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up here, but just kind of keep this in mind, right? As you're building your training plans and as you're going about your training, be thinking about your if-thens and be thinking about, okay, this is where I want to be. My backup, if that goes south, goes to here, right? Sometimes you pivot laterally and you stay in the same, operational order. And sometimes you descend a category. Sometimes you can raise back up to a category. It just depends on, on your tactics, your ability, who you're facing, again, your conditions and consequences. So I'll end it here, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.